Okay.
Looking all amazed.
Okay, once again.
Okay,
Josie,
here we go.
Josie.
You've got to be fueled to do this.
Fueled and fooled.
Okay.
The then solar eclipse.
The solar eclipse of 1998. North of the city of Coro, the Paraguana Peninsula extends into the Caribbean from the Venezuelan mainland like a narrow-stemmed leaf. A row of oil refineries flanks the peninsula on the southwest, but above the town of Punto Fijo, there are only small fishing villages and thorny desert scrub. The zone of totality of the solar eclipse, I think the cosmos are talking, on February 26, 1998, passed across this sear peninsula. On that date, within a 52-mile corridor extending from the southwest to the northeast across the Paraguana, the moon would totally block out the sun for more than 3 minutes. Eric Durbin, Greg Links, and I had planned for more than a year to go to Venezuela to see this total eclipse. Eric had carefully considered various locations within the path of totality and decided the only place that combined accessibility with the likelihood of clear weather and relatively few people was the Paraguana. Even so, we feared that Coro's hotels would all be booked the night before the big event, and since in typical outlaw murder fashion, we had neglected to reserve rooms or anywhere during our trip, we planned to seek lodging in a town about 20 miles south of Coro and were prepared to camp out if necessary. On the 25th, we drove from Barquisimeto to Coro through a searing desert for what seemed like endless hours and discovered that Eric's Venezuela highway map bore very little relationship to reality.
This is true.
We weren't exactly lost, but nothing was where it was supposed to be, especially the towns below Coro, where we had hoped to find lodging. But luck was with us. We ended up driving all the way to Coro and, with darkness upon us, secured the last available room in the first place we saw, the Hotel Federal. This hotel, with tasty chicken and pasta dishes and limitless supplies of polar beer, proved to be our haven for the next 3 nights. On the morning of the eclipse, we set out early, fearing a rush of tourists and Venezuelans onto the peninsula. The road was crowded, but thanks, no doubt, to the presence of the big oil companies, it was a 4-lane divided highway, one of the finest roads we've seen anywhere in the tropics. So we made excellent time. The Venezuelans were ready for us. All along the way, big yellow signs proclaimed in huge black letters, Ruta del Eclipse, along with arrows pointing the way northward. People were selling all kinds of stuff along the roadside. My favorite was a whole goat carcass. And every few miles, we passed people standing in the road, handing out leaflets. Thinking that perhaps it was information about the eclipse, we slowed down to take flyers from a particularly attractive young woman, only to discover that we were being solicited to join a religious cult. Soon the road split, and most of the cars continued up the east side of the peninsula, so we headed west. At Punto Fijo, we turned north along the west coast, leaving the oil refineries behind. We wanted to be able to look across the water to the west, facing the approaching shadow of the eclipse. The road narrowed to 2 lanes, thorn scrub and cactus extended to the horizon. A sparse cloud cover that had caused us concern early in the morning burned away, the sun blazed down, and the temperature was 95. Halfway up the coast, a narrow paved road descended to a small fishing village called Amuay. We left the traffic stream and drove into the village. It was a tranquil, tropical gem, strung out along a crescent-shaped beach by a bay of sparkling water. It was a neat place. Pelicans, royal terns, and laughing gulls coursed back and forth, plucking fish from the sea, and being robbed of their treasures in turn by ever-vigilant frigate birds. The view across the bay was toward the approaching eclipse. Eric consulted his maps and eclipse tables. We were within about 6 miles of the absolute center of the zone of totality.
Nice.
There were no other tourists in sight. This was the place. We might have been the only turistas, but we were not alone. We became a fascinating diversion for the people of Amuay as they awaited the eclipse. First, occupants of the house next to the beach, a young family with 3 small children, came out to introduce themselves, and they stayed with us for nearly 4 hours, and I regret that we did not write down their names. Then 3 middle-aged gentlemen, obviously the village elders, came to check us out. One of them, named Rudolfo, seemed to be the Jefe. He claimed to know some English, but it turned out all he could say was, "Thank you very much,"
Thank you very much.
a
Mr.
phrase
Thank you
he
very
employed
much.
often and in all situations. After a while, the 3 elders disappeared into a nearby house and emerged with 3 cold beers, which they gave to us. We had been accepted. As if by an unseen signal, people began to emerge from the surrounding houses. First 10, then 20, then 30 people of all ages, mostly children and teenagers. They surrounded us, tugging at our sleeves to show us one thing or another, accurately pointing out the local birds in our Venezuelan field guides, and lining up to look at distant boats through Greg's spotting scope.
The party gathers.
The eclipse began at precisely 12:37 p.m. 2 of the teenage girls in the village had thick, smoked welder's glass and could look directly at the sun. For the others, we monitored the progress of the eclipse by projecting the solar disk through our binoculars onto the hood of the car. I punched a hole in one of Eric's business cards, showed it to one small child to show how to watch the eclipse by projecting the sun's image through the hole onto the ground. The adults, not wanting to appear too interested in a child's toy, surreptitiously borrowed the card from the youngster from time to time to check on the gradual progress of the eclipse.
That's
By
great.
1:30, the solar disk was half obscured, and light levels had become noticeably reduced. At 1:55, with the sun about 7/8 obscured, the light appeared equivalent to that at sunset, and my camera light meter was registering 4 f-stops lower than the value at high noon. At that point, the pelicans and frigate birds headed off to their roosts, and the local people immediately noticed this, pointing at the birds and exclaiming, "Creen que es la noche," they think it's nighttime. The next few minutes seemed to go very fast. A dark purplish-black shadow appeared on the western horizon, like an approaching thunderstorms, but coming at us very low and expanding rapidly as we watched. It was the shadow cone of the total eclipse. It raced toward us over the water, and then at 2:09 p.m., the total eclipse was upon us. For 3 minutes and 40 seconds, the sun was totally hidden behind a jet black moon. The solar corona and at least 4 planets, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn, were clearly visible. The air felt cool. I think it was in the high 70s. Why didn't we bring a thermometer? It was so dark that colors of the houses and trees could not be distinguished. We were prepared to be very calm and businesslike during the total eclipse, but instead we all went bananas. We tried to take a few pictures, but mostly we gaped, shouted, and ran about. It's true. When the edge of the sun reappeared, Eric, Greg, and I found ourselves giving the locals high five and slapping one another on the back. The return of the sun was anticlimactic. The colors returned to the landscape, the temperature started back up through the 80s, the birds returned to the bay, and after warm handshakes all around, most of the local people drifted away to their homes. The family that had first come out to greet us stayed, and the husband even invited us into his humble home to, quote, sit for a while. Breaking away was difficult and awkward, but we felt we had taken enough of their time and space. So by 3:15, we were on the road back to Coro. Perhaps the greatest contrast we experienced during our entire stay in Venezuela was our passage from the tranquil seaside village of Amuay to the bumper-to-bumper traffic jam we endured leaving the peninsula. Back at the hotel, the other American tourists were already wearing their "I saw the eclipse of '98" t-shirts and looking for other Americans to bond with. We were not feeling sociable. We knew that the best part of our eclipse experience was to have been with the people of Amuay. Though we could communicate with the residents only through sign language and my mediocre Spanish, on this magical afternoon,